The autumn of 1997 painted the small town of Cedar Falls in brilliant oranges and deep reds. 10-year-old Marcus Williams loved this time of year more than any other. The crisp air meant football season, Halloween was approaching, and the woods behind his grandmother's house became a magical playground of fallen leaves and hidden adventures. On October 15, 1997, Marcus kissed his grandmother goodbye and promised he'd be back before dark. He grabbed his red backpack, the one with the torn zipper that his mother kept meaning to fix, and headed into the Whispering Pines forest that stretched endlessly behind the old Victorian house where he spent every weekend. "Don't go past the old oak tree," his grandmother, Eleanor Williams, called after him. It was the same warning she gave every Saturday, and Marcus always nodded dutifully, even though he'd ventured much deeper into those woods countless times before. That was the last time anyone saw Marcus Williams alive. When darkness fell and Marcus hadn't returned, Eleanor's worry transformed into panic. She called the police, who initially dismissed her concerns. "Boys will be boys," Officer Patterson had said dismissively. "He'll come home when he gets hungry." But Marcus never came home. The search for Marcus Williams became the largest missing person operation in Cedar Falls history. Volunteers from 3 counties joined law enforcement in combing through every inch of Whispering Pines forest. Bloodhounds followed his scent to a creek about 2 miles from his grandmother's house, but there the trail went cold. Detective Sarah Chen, a recent transfer from the city, took charge of the investigation. Unlike her colleagues, she didn't believe in coincidences or simple explanations. She interviewed everyone who knew Marcus, mapped his usual routes through the forest, and spent countless hours studying the terrain. "There's something wrong about this," she confided to her partner, Detective Mike Rodriguez. "A 10-year-old doesn't just vanish into thin air. Someone knows something." The investigation revealed troubling details. Several witnesses reported seeing a dark blue sedan parked along Forest Road around the time Marcus disappeared. A gas station attendant remembered a nervous man buying zip ties and a shovel that same afternoon. But without concrete evidence, these leads led nowhere. After 6 months, the case went cold. The media moved on to other stories. The volunteers stopped searching. Even some of Marcus's family members began to accept that they might never know what happened to the bright, curious boy who loved exploring the woods, but Detective Chen never gave up. Even after she retired in 2015, she kept the case file in her home office, reviewing it periodically, hoping something new would surface. David Martinez had recently inherited 40 acres of woodland from his uncle, including a section that bordered the infamous Whispering Pines forest. An environmental scientist by trade, David planned to conduct a comprehensive survey of the property before deciding whether to develop it or preserve it as a nature sanctuary. On a gray March morning in 2020, David was using ground-penetrating radar to map underground features when his equipment detected an anomaly about 3 feet below the surface. The readings suggested a large rectangular object that didn't belong in the natural landscape. Initially, David assumed it might be an old septic tank or forgotten storage container. Many rural properties had buried debris from decades past. But something about the precise depth and rectangular shape nagged at him. The object was exactly 6 feet long and 3 feet wide, dimensions that sent a chill down his spine. Unable to shake his uneasiness, David decided to excavate the area himself. Armed with a shovel and growing dread, he began to dig. 3 hours of careful digging revealed the corner of a wooden crate, weathered but intact. David's hands trembled as he cleared away more soil, revealing crude but sturdy construction, the kind of box someone might build in a hurry but intended to last. The crate was secured with a heavy padlock that had rusted but held firm. David drove to the nearest hardware store and returned with bolt cutters, his mind racing with possibilities, none of them good. When the lock finally gave way and David lifted the creaking lid, his worst fears were confirmed. Inside the crate, wrapped in a blue tarp that had somehow survived over 2 decades underground, were the skeletal remains of a child. But it wasn't just the remains that made David's blood run cold, it was what else was in that makeshift grave. A red backpack with a broken zipper. A wallet containing a school ID card for Marcus Williams, Cedar Falls Elementary. A pair of small sneakers, the kind a 10-year-old might wear for exploring the woods. And most heartbreaking of all, a handwritten letter addressed to my mom. But there was something else in that crate that would crack open a mystery that had haunted Cedar Falls for over 2 decades, a leather-bound journal, its pages yellowed but readable, containing detailed entries about Marcus's captivity and the identity of his killer. David immediately called the police, and soon the scene was swarming with investigators. Detective Chen, now in her 70s but still sharp, arrived within hours of getting the call. After more than 2 decades, she finally had answers. The journal belonged to Marcus himself. In his neat 10-year-old handwriting, he had documented 3 weeks of captivity before his death. The entries revealed a horrifying story of kidnapping, imprisonment in an underground bunker, and the gradual realization that his captor had no intention of letting him go. But Marcus Williams was a smart, observant child. His journal entries included detailed descriptions of his captor, the location where he was held, and most importantly, the man's real name, Thomas Brennan. a drifter who had been doing odd jobs around Cedar Falls in the fall of 1997. Journal entries grew increasingly desperate as days passed. Day 5. The man brought me food again. He has a scar on his left hand shaped like a star. He keeps telling me I'll go home soon, but I don't think he's telling the truth. Day 12. I found a way to write without him seeing. If something happens to me, I want people to know his name is Thomas Brennan. He drives the blue car. He has a tattoo of an eagle on his arm. Day 18. I'm getting sick. The man seems angry all the time now. I don't think I'm going home. If someone finds this, please tell my mom and grandma that I love them. The final entry was dated 3 weeks after Marcus's disappearance. It was brief and heartbreaking. I can hear him digging outside. I'm scared. I love you, Mom. Armed with Marcus's detailed observations, police quickly tracked down Thomas Brennan. Now 58 years old and living under an assumed name in Nevada, Brennan had spent the last 23 years looking over his shoulder, knowing that someday the truth might surface. When confronted with the evidence, Brennan initially denied everything. But Marcus's journal was too detailed, too accurate to dismiss. The description of Brennan's distinctive scar, his tattoos, even his mannerisms, all matched perfectly with the man police arrested. During questioning, Brennan finally broke down and confessed. He had been hired to do yard work at a house near the forest. He had noticed Marcus playing in the woods and, in a moment of dark impulse, had decided to take him. He claimed he originally planned to release the boy, but panic and paranoia had driven him to commit an unthinkable crime. I never meant for it to go that far, Brennan sobbed during his confession. But he was so smart, he saw too much. I was scared he'd identify me. The confession led police to the original crime scene, an abandoned hunting cabin deep in the forest where Brennan had kept Marcus captive. After all these years, investigators found traces of DNA evidence that corroborated Brennan's story. Marcus's mother, Linda Williams, was now 52 years old and had spent half her life wondering what happened to her son. The discovery of his remains brought profound sadness but also, finally, closure. For 23 years, I wondered if he was out there somewhere, if he needed me, she said through tears at Brennan's sentencing hearing. At least now I know he's at peace. And I know he never stopped thinking about home. The journal entries revealed Marcus's remarkable courage in his final weeks. Even facing unimaginable terror, he had thought clearly enough to document everything, hoping it might someday help catch his killer and bring peace to his family. Detective Chin, who had carried the weight of Marcus's case for decades, finally felt a sense of resolution. That little boy solved his own case, she said. Even at 10 years old, faced with the worst possible situation, he was thinking about others. He was thinking about justice. The Marcus Williams case sent shockwaves through Cedar Falls and beyond. It highlighted how a determined child's courage and intelligence had ultimately led to justice, even decades later. The case also sparked new interest in other cold cases from the 1990s, with investigators wondering if other missing children might have left similar clues. David Martinez, the man who made the discovery, struggled with the weight of what he'd found. You think you're just doing a land survey, and instead you uncover someone's worst nightmare, he reflected. But I'm grateful I could give that family some answers. The story inspired new protocols for missing children cases and advanced ground-penetrating radar techniques for cold case investigations. Marcus's journal was preserved as evidence, but selected excerpts were shared with law enforcement agencies as a training tool, showing how even young victims might provide crucial investigative leads. Marcus Williams was finally laid to rest in Cedar Falls Cemetery on a warm spring day in 2020, surrounded by family members who had never stopped loving him and a community that had never forgotten his disappearance. His grandmother Eleanor, now 89, was too frail to attend the service, but she made sure Marcus was buried with his favorite book, Island of the Blue Dolphins, which he had been reading the weekend he vanished. He was always so curious about everything, Eleanor remembered. He asked a million questions and never forgot the answers. Even at the end, he was still trying to solve problems and help people. A memorial fund was established in Marcus's name to support missing children investigations, particularly those involving advanced search technologies. The fund helped purchase ground-penetrating radar equipment for rural police departments, ensuring that other cases might be solved more quickly. Thomas Brennan was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. During his incarceration, he provided information that helped solve 2 other missing person cases from the 1990s, though neither involved children. The Whispering Pines Forest, once a place of childhood adventure for Marcus, became a memorial nature preserve. A simple stone marker near the old oak tree bears his name and dates, along with the words, "His curiosity and courage brought justice." Detective Sarah Chin passed away peacefully in 2022, having finally seen resolution to the case that had defined much of her career. At her funeral, Linda Williams spoke about how Chin never gave up hope, never stopped believing that Marcus deserved justice. "Some people say time heals all wounds," Linda said. "But I think what really heals wounds is truth. Detective Chen never stopped searching for the truth about my son. The Marcus Williams case became a landmark in criminal justice, demonstrating how evidence can survive for decades and how victim testimony, even from a child, can ultimately prevail over the darkness of crime. David Martinez still lives on the property where he made the discovery. He has preserved the area as a nature sanctuary, but he'll never forget the day he uncovered a secret that had been buried for 23 years. Marcus was brave enough to leave us clues, David often reflects. The least we could do was be brave enough to find them. The red backpack with the broken zipper sits in an evidence locker, a poignant reminder of a little boy's last adventure. But Marcus Williams' true legacy isn't the tragedy of his death, it's the triumph of his courage, the power of his observations, and the ultimate victory of truth over evil. In the end, Marcus Williams did make it home. It just took 23 years and the sharp eyes of a 10-year-old who never stopped thinking, never stopped hoping, and never stopped believing that justice would eventually find its way to the light.